For centuries, the world has been told a simple story. Britain became a global empire through bravery, battles, and the brilliance of its explorers. But the truth is far more intriguing and far more secret. Behind every red-coated soldier and every naval victory was a silent force that never appeared in paintings or history books. It wasn't an army, it wasn't a king. It was money, organized, weaponized, and engineered with a precision the world had never seen. This hidden financial engine worked in the shadows of London's narrow streets, inside counting houses lit by candlelight, where merchants whispered about risks nations feared to take. It turned oceans into opportunity, debt into dominance, and trade routes into arteries of wealth. Britain didn't just conquer lands, it conquered cash flow. In this series, we will uncover the untold story of how a small island built a money machine so powerful that it reshaped the world. And once you understand how it worked, you'll never look at history, or modern finance, the same way again. While other empires relied primarily on armies and land conquests, Britain's rise was fueled by the sea. Its financial success was not forged in battlefields, but in ports, shipyards, and merchant halls. Merchants and investors pooled money into daring maritime expeditions that traveled thousands of miles in search of spices, silks, silver, and other treasures. Each journey carried immense risk. A single storm could sink a ship and erase fortunes overnight, but the rewards were astronomical. This system gave birth to a new form of financial ingenuity: shared ventures, early risk management, and the clever use of insurance. Merchants would sell partial shares of a ship, spreading the risk among dozens of investors. When a ship returned with exotic goods, wealth multiplied faster than any army could conquer land. The oceans became both a battlefield and a bank, where calculated risk turned into empire-building power. Britain discovered that controlling trade routes and financing voyages could be more decisive than deploying soldiers, and this strategy quietly reshaped the global balance of power. One of Britain's most brilliant financial innovations was the creation of joint stock companies. Imagine a group of merchants, bankers, and visionaries coming together, pooling their money and sharing both the risk and reward of enormous ventures. No longer was a single investor responsible for a ship lost at sea or a failed colony. The burden, and the profit, was distributed. This system allowed Britain to finance ventures on a scale no other nation could attempt. Joint stock companies became the backbone of empire building. The East India Company, for example, started as a modest trading venture but grew into a global powerhouse, controlling armies, ports, and political influence. Through clever accounting, stock trading, and reinvestment strategies, Britain created an almost self-sustaining cycle of wealth accumulation. Investors were motivated not just by profit, but by the prestige of participating in empire-making. This was more than business. It was a social and political tool, turning money into power, and power into the engine of imperial dominance. While armies marched and fleets sailed, Britain quietly built another kind of power: its banking system. Hidden behind unassuming doors in London's narrow streets were bankers who controlled more than coins. They controlled influence. Money was the unseen weapon, and banks became the shadowy architects of empire. Loans to monarchs, financing expeditions, and issuing credit to merchants allowed Britain to extend influence far beyond its borders without firing a single cannon. These financial houses operated with discretion and precision. Ledgers filled with coded entries recorded the flow of wealth across continents, from silver mines in the Americas to spice markets in Asia. Interest rates, bonds, and early forms of insurance turned risk into opportunity, and opportunity into domination. Britain's bankers didn't just handle money, they created it, lent it, and shaped the world with it. In the quiet of candle-lit offices, the empire was being designed, not on maps or battlefields, but in the careful calculation of profit and risk. The shadows of London held more power than any crown. Britain realized early that controlling trade could be more powerful than conquering land. While armies took territory, it was trade routes that created lasting wealth and influence. Strategic ports, monopolized commodities, and carefully negotiated treaties allowed Britain to dominate global commerce. Every shipment of spices, textiles, or silver was more than a transaction. It was a statement of power. The East India Company became the perfect example. Initially a trading venture, it evolved into a semi-governmental force capable of raising armies, collecting taxes, and shaping local politics. Profit and governance blended seamlessly. Merchants were essentially diplomats, and every coin in circulation reinforced imperial authority. Britain didn't merely export goods, it exported its influence, embedding itself into local economies across continents. Over time, the empire's reach extended far beyond what guns or fortresses could achieve, proving that money, strategy, and trade could create an empire even stronger than any battlefield victory. While Europe battled on fields with cannons and swords, Britain discovered a subtler method of warfare, financing conflicts from the shadows. By lending money to allies, funding mercenaries, or underwriting entire expeditions, British financiers could shape the outcomes of wars without ever stepping onto the battlefield. Their leverage came from the flow of capital, not the movement of armies. This financial strategy gave Britain extraordinary influence. Kings depended on loans, merchants relied on credit, and nations scrambled to maintain favorable terms. A well-timed investment could cripple rivals or ensure dominance over strategic territories. Profit motives intertwined seamlessly with political objectives, making wealth itself a weapon. The empire grew not just from conquest, but from its ability to control resources, debts, and trade networks. Behind every banner on the battlefield, there was an invisible hand orchestrating power, silent, precise, and often more effective than a cannon. Britain didn't just build an empire, it wove a global web of influence. From the Americas to Asia, the empire extended its reach through trade, finance, and diplomacy. Every colony, port, and outpost became a node in a vast network that connected markets, governments, and merchants. Money flowed like invisible currents, linking distant continents in ways most nations could not imagine. The brilliance of this system was in its subtlety. Britain often didn't need to deploy armies to assert dominance. Financial leverage, treaties, and strategic investments accomplished the task. A loan to a king, a monopoly on spices, or control over shipping routes meant power without the chaos of war. Local economies became intertwined with British interests, creating dependency that was invisible but incredibly effective. By understanding and manipulating these global connections, Britain transformed a small island into the nucleus of a worldwide empire, demonstrating that influence could travel faster and further than any army. Britain mastered the art of monopolies. By controlling key commodities, spices, tea, sugar, and textiles, the empire dictated prices, supply, and global trade flows. These monopolies were not merely commercial, they were political tools. Companies like the East India Company held the power to influence local rulers, enforce contracts, and manipulate markets across continents. Every cargo shipment, every trade negotiation reinforced Britain's grip on the global economy. The genius lay in scale and strategy. Small investments, carefully positioned, could yield enormous returns and control over entire regions. Monopoly control allowed Britain to turn scarcity into profit, and profit into power. By dominating trade in select commodities, Britain ensured other nations became dependent on its markets and policies. Through markets, the empire extended its influence quietly, steadily, and effectively. What others achieved with armies and fortresses, Britain achieved with ledgers, contracts, and commerce. Britain understood that money itself could be a weapon. Controlling currency, interest rates, and credit allowed the empire to dictate terms to allies and rivals alike. Banks in London became the nerve centers of global finance, issuing loans, stabilizing markets, and orchestrating investments that would influence politics across continents. Currency was more than a medium of exchange. It was a tool for diplomacy, leverage, and empire building. By establishing reliable systems of credit and coinage, Britain ensured that merchants, governments, and colonies depended on its financial networks. The ability to fund expeditions, pay armies, and stabilize markets gave Britain a subtle, enduring form of power. Wars could be financed, revolts suppressed, and trade manipulated, all without a single battle. In effect, Britain transformed money into influence, and influence into an invisible empire that spanned oceans, continents, and centuries. Britain realized early that knowledge could be as valuable as gold. Information about markets, political instability, and rival nations became a form of capital, traded and leveraged like any commodity. Spies, merchants, and diplomats gathered intelligence that informed investments, trade decisions, and strategic maneuvers across the globe. Accurate information meant profit. Misinformation could cripple rivals. This intelligence network worked hand in hand with the financial engine of the empire. Investors made decisions based on reports from distant colonies, while companies used information to manipulate markets. Britain's ability to anticipate global trends, understand supply chains, and act on intelligence gave it an invisible advantage. Knowledge, once codified and monetized, became another tool in the empire's arsenal. By treating information as currency, Britain extended its reach silently and effectively, proving that in the game of empires, what you know can be as powerful as what you own. By the 18th century, Britain's empire had mastered the art of operating invisibly. While armies marched and colonies grew, the true power of the empire was often unseen, exerted through financial networks, trade agreements, and subtle political influence. Merchants, bankers, and politicians acted as the unseen architects, ensuring that the empire expanded, not just in territory, but in control over wealth and resources. This invisible hand guided decisions from London to the farthest reaches of Asia, Africa, and the Americas. Credit lines determined the success of expeditions, loans shaped alliances, and trade monopolies dictated the rise and fall of markets. Britain learned that the most enduring power was the one that didn't rely on force, but on trust, influence, and economic leverage. The empire's ability to shape events silently, often before anyone noticed, became its most potent weapon. In essence, Britain had transformed strategy, diplomacy, and finance into a single, seamless engine of global dominance. The British Empire's secret money machine didn't end with the 19th century. Its legacy continues to shape global finance, trade, and power structures today. What began as risky maritime ventures, clever investments, and monopolized trade grew into systems, institutions, and strategies that outlasted empires themselves. Banks, stock markets, and multinational corporations trace roots back to the lessons Britain learned in turning capital into influence. By studying the rise of this hidden financial engine, we understand that true power isn't always loud or visible. Sometimes it is quiet, calculated, and patient, working behind the scenes to shape the course of history. The empire demonstrated that money, when wielded strategically, could achieve what armies could not: long-lasting influence, intercontinental reach, and a network of control spanning centuries. Today, global capitalism, credit systems, and financial strategies echo the same principles that allowed Britain to quietly become the world's richest empire. The story of the money machine is not just history, it is a blueprint for understanding modern power in the world.